The car came out of nowhere. Marcus shoved Amara onto the sidewalk, half a second before the bumper found him instead. She screamed his name and dropped to her knees beside him, pressing both hands against the blood already soaking through his shirt, refusing to let the crowd pull her away. By the time the ambulance doors slammed shut, a doctor was already saying the words nobody wanted to hear. His spine was crushed. He might never walk again. Then came the number that would define the next year of her life. A surgery she could never afford, due before the money even existed. 3 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. Amara Bell was 22, 1 semester from her nursing license, and already the only person in that house who worked like her life depended on it. Because it did. Every double shift, every skipped meal, every dollar she made went straight into an envelope marked for rent, groceries, anything that kept the lights on for a family that had raised her since she could barely walk. She had never once called Marcus anything but Papa. He was the one who taught her to ride a bike in the church parking lot, who sat up with her the night before every exam she was too scared to take. Denise was harder to reach, warmer with her own son Tyrell than she had ever been with Amara, quicker to defend his failures than to acknowledge her successes. But Amara told herself that was just how mothers sometimes were. She kept giving anyway. She always had. Then the accident took the one person in that house who had never once made her feel like a guest in her own home. Now the surgeon needed an answer by Friday. The number on the estimate had too many zeros for a girl who was already skipping dinner to keep gas in the car. Denise wanted to know how fast Amara could get it. Nobody asked how she would. Amara made herself a promise standing in that hospital corridor. Whatever this cost her, Marcus was not going to lose his legs because she had failed to find the money in time. She had spent her whole life proving she deserved her place in that house. She was not about to stop now, not when it mattered most. She did not know yet that Denise had already started making calls of her own. She did not know that a cheap ad promising fast cash for desperate women would lead her, 3 nights later, into a hotel room belonging to a man whose family owned half the skyline she could see from her bus stop. And she had no way of knowing that the answer to a question she had never thought to ask, the question of where she had actually come from, was closer than it had ever been. The billing office at St. Augustine Memorial did not care that Amara had been awake for 30 hours. The woman behind the glass slid a printed estimate across the counter like it was nothing, like the number on it did not have the power to end a life. Emergency stabilization, spinal imaging, a first surgery already completed to keep Marcus breathing, $61,000, due in 30 days. With a second surgery still to come if the first one held. Amara folded the paper into her jacket pocket before her hands could start shaking in front of a stranger. She found Marcus propped up in a hospital bed, 2 floors up. A brace holding his neck still, tubes taped along the back of one hand. He looked smaller than she remembered him being just that morning, before any of this happened, before he had put his whole body between her and a car he never saw coming. "You should be at your lecture," he said, the words slow and thick with medication. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Amara. He caught her sleeve before she could pull the blanket higher over his chest. "This is not your job to carry. You carried me my whole life. Let me carry something back." He did not have the strength to argue with her, and some part of him, the part that had raised her since she was small enough to fit against his shoulder, did not want to. He closed his eyes instead, and for a moment she let herself believe that loving someone enough could be its own kind of medicine. It could not pay a hospital bill, though. That part was still hers alone. At home that night, the house on Larkspur Street had already rearranged itself around the accident without rearranging its priorities. Denise stood at the stove reheating a plate for Tyrell, who had walked in an hour late smelling like a bar and offering no explanation for it. He had a rough day, Denise said, before Amara had asked anything at all. The job didn't work out. They said he wasn't a good fit. He didn't show up for the interview, Denise. I drove past the place at 4. His car wasn't there. Don't start with me tonight. Denise did not look up from the stove. Your father is lying in a hospital bed, and you want to argue about your brother's job. He is not your brother's father, some cold and honest part of Amara wanted to say. He is mine. He has always only ever been mine, in every way that mattered. And none of you have ever once treated it like it went both directions. She did not say it. She had learned a long time ago that saying true things in that kitchen only ever cost her more than staying quiet did. How much do they need? Denise asked instead, finally turning around. For the surgery, $61,000, and that's just the first one. Denise's face did not change the way a mother's face was supposed to change at a number like that. It sharpened instead, the way it did whenever she was already 3 steps ahead, calculating what this would cost her personally rather than what it might cost the man she had married. Then you'd better find it fast, she said, because if we lose this house trying to pay for something insurance won't cover, I promise you, there won't be a version of this family left for anyone to come home to. You understand what I'm telling you. I understand you're telling me it's my problem to solve alone. I'm telling you it's everyone's problem, and you're the only one in this house who's ever been any good at solving them. It was, Amara realized later, lying awake with her phone's light the only thing on in the room, the closest thing to a compliment Denise had given her in over a year. It did not feel like one. It felt like being handed a weight and told to be grateful someone had finally noticed she could lift it. She opened her banking app and watched the number blink back at her, small and stubborn and nowhere close to $61,000. She had already sold what little jewelry she owned. She had already picked up every shift the hospital's cafeteria would give a nursing student with morning classes. There was nothing left to sell, except time she did not have. So she did what every person running out of options eventually does. She started scrolling through the parts of the internet she had always told herself she would never need. That was where she found it, buried under 3 legitimate job postings and a used furniture listing. An ad for a fertility clinic offering fast compensation to healthy young women willing to donate. $100,000, enough for the first surgery and most of the second. Enough if she was careful about who she let in on the terms. She read it 4 times before she let herself dial the number at the bottom of the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button for almost a full minute, the same way it had hovered over Marcus's hospital room door the first time they told her how bad the damage really was. Then she pressed it, because some fears are smaller than the fear of watching someone you love disappear one unpaid bill at a time. The address on the ad led her to a 4th-floor office above a nail salon, the kind of place that looked legitimate enough in daylight and deeply wrong the moment the elevator doors closed behind her. A woman at the front desk had her fill out 3 pages of paperwork without ever once making eye contact. Then a man in a white coat called her name. He was younger than she expected, tall, with the kind of exhaustion in his eyes that only came from working shifts nobody else wanted. He introduced himself only as Dr. Vance, no first name offered, and led her into an exam room that felt colder than the hallway. Standard protocol, he said, sliding a clipboard toward her. I'll need you to undress for a physical assessment before we discuss compensation. Something about the way he said it, too fast, too clinical, made the hair on the back of Amara's neck stand up. I thought this was just paperwork today. It's a fertility program. We have to verify certain things. I'm not comfortable with that. Then I'm not sure why you're here. She stood up so quickly, the paper on the exam table tore beneath her. She reached for the door and found it locked, the handle refusing to turn no matter how hard she twisted it. And for one long, airless second, she understood exactly how a person could disappear from an office like this and never be seen again. Please, she said, her voice cracking in a way she hated. Let me out. I made a mistake. I never should have come here. The lock clicked open on its own. She did not stop moving until she was 3 blocks away, breathing hard against the side of a building, her whole body shaking with the particular kind of fear that comes from realizing exactly how close you came to something you cannot take back. What she did not know, standing there catching her breath, was that the man behind that locked door had been the one to send it clicking open. Julian Vance had spent the last 6 months quietly shutting down predatory ads exactly like the one that had brought her in, posing as a clinician just long enough to frighten desperate young women out of a scheme that took far more from them than it ever paid. He had done it a dozen times. He had never once felt the way he felt watching Amara Bell's hand shake on that doorknob. She is not stupid, he thought, reviewing the intake form she had left behind. She is out of options. There is a difference, and most people never bother to learn it. He should have let it end there. He almost did. Julian had spent the last 2 years since medical school avoiding almost everything his last name was supposed to buy him. He worked double shifts his father did not understand and his mother actively resented, drove a car nobody at the hospital would guess belonged to a Vance, and told himself the reason he had not settled down was that he had simply not found a reason worth settling for. He had said that sentence to himself so many times, it had started to sound less like the truth and more like something he needed to keep believing. Then, 3 nights later, his phone rang from a number he did not recognize. "It's me," Amara said before he could speak. "From the clinic. I know you probably think I'm out of my mind for calling, but I need to know if that offer is still on the table. If you think Amara deserves better than a man locking her in a room to scare her, hit subscribe, because her story's only getting started." He should have told her no. Instead, he told her to meet him somewhere else, somewhere with no locked doors and no fake clipboards. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Julian Vance found himself breaking every rule he had made for exactly this kind of situation. They met at a diner 2 exits outside the city, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a jukebox nobody used anymore. He told her the truth. The ad had been a front for something far worse than fertility donation, a network that promised fast cash and delivered women into situations they could not walk away from. He had staged the exam to scare her out of it before it went any further. "So there's no money," she said, and something in her voice broke on the word money in a way that had nothing to do with pride. "There's no clinic. There's no program." He watched her hands twist together on the table. "What's the money actually for?" She had not planned to tell him. She told him anyway, the whole of it. Marcus and the accident and the surgery and a mother who measured love in dollar amounts. And Julian Vance, heir to a fortune he had spent his whole adult life trying not to need. Listened to a stranger's entire life fall apart across a Formica table, and felt something shift loose in his chest that he did not have a name for yet. "I can help you," he said finally. "Not through some ad. Just, honestly, if you'll let me." She should have said no. She had learned not to trust anyone who offered her something for nothing, because in her experience, nothing ever came free, not even kindness. But she was so tired of being the only one holding anything up. That night became the reason for the title of this story, though not in the way either of them expected going in. It was quieter than either of them planned for, and sadder, and more honest than anything either of them had let themselves be in longer than they could say. When it was over, he pressed an envelope into her hands, double what she had asked for, and told her it was not because of what had happened between them. Then why? Because nobody should have to choose between their father's life and their own dignity. "You shouldn't have had to make that trade at all." She thanked him in a voice that did not sound like her own, and left before the sun came up, and spent the entire bus ride home asking herself the same question over and over. What have I done? She did not yet have an answer. She only knew that the envelope in her bag was enough to save Marcus's legs, and that some decisions cost you something you cannot see the bill for until much later. The surgery took 6 hours, and for every one of them, Amara sat in a waiting room chair, memorizing the pattern in the carpet, because it was easier than thinking about what would happen if it did not work. It worked. Marcus came out of it with feeling returning to his left leg first. Then, 3 days later, enough movement in his right to make the physical therapist smile, for the first time since he had started treating him. He gripped Amara's hand so hard it left a mark, and told her, in a voice still rough from the breathing tube, that she had given him his life back. "You gave me mine first," she said, and meant it more than he would ever know. She did not tell him where the money had come from. She told herself that was a kindness, not a lie. At home, the relief lasted exactly 11 days. "Tyrell has a real shot at something," Denise announced over dinner, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table like it was already decided. "A logistics job, good benefits. But there's a referral fee, $6,200, due by Friday, or the spot goes to someone else." "Denise, that's not a job. That's a scam. Nobody legitimate charges a referral fee to get hired. You don't know that." "I do know that. I've seen it before." "Well, I know my son, and I know he deserves a chance same as anyone." Denise's mouth thinned into a line Amara had learned to read as the end of the conversation, whether she liked it or not. "You found money once. Find it again." What was left of the surgery money, the cushion Amara had been quietly saving in case Marcus needed a second procedure, was gone by that Friday afternoon. She did not fight it as hard as she should have. Some part of her, the part that still measured her worth in this house by what she was willing to hand over, told her that fighting would cost her more than the money already had. She went back to the hospital the following week for Marcus's follow-up scan and found herself, entirely by accident, in an exam room with Dr. Vance again. "You're his daughter," Julian said, reading the chart, giving no indication in his voice that they had ever met outside these walls. "Good. Recovery's ahead of schedule. Strength in both legs is better than I'd have predicted at this stage." "Thank you, doctor. Anything else I should know before I sign off on today's visit?" There was nothing personal in the question at all. And she understood, watching him keep his eyes fixed carefully on the chart instead of on her, that this was its own kind of decency. Whatever had happened between them belonged somewhere he was not willing to bring into a room where her father's recovery was the only thing that mattered. "No," she said. "Nothing else." He nodded once and did not look up again until she had already left the room, and told himself that was exactly how it should be. It did not stay that simple for long. 2 weeks after the diner, Julian called her again, and this time neither of them pretended it was about anything medical. They met at a coffee shop close enough to campus that she could walk there between classes, and for an hour, sitting across from a man whose family she still knew almost nothing about, Amara let herself do something she had not done in longer than she could remember. She talked about herself without immediately turning the conversation into a list of problems that needed solving. "You want to be a trauma nurse?" Julian said. Not quite a question. "Most people your age want the easier rotation." "Easier isn't the same as better. I like being useful in the moment nobody else wants to be in. That's either the most reckless thing I've ever heard or the most honest. Can it be both?" He laughed, and she noticed, not for the first time, that he did it rarely enough that it seemed to surprise even him. She still did not know his last name. She had stopped asking, telling herself it did not matter, that whatever this was between them existed in a version of her life, with no room for the man's actual world in it. Tyrell caught her on the porch a few nights later, smelling less like a bar than usual, his hands shoved deep in his pockets in a way that made him look younger than 23. "I didn't ask her to take your surgery money," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "For the job thing. I didn't know that's where it came from until after." "Would it have mattered if you had known?" He did not answer right away, and the silence told her more than anything he could have said. It was not agreement, and it was not innocence either. It was something closer to a boy who had spent his whole life being handed things without asking what they cost someone else, finally starting, just barely, to notice the bill. "I'm not the one you should be worried about right now," he said instead. "Derek Ortiz has been asking around about you. Where you work, what days you're on campus, who you're close to. He doesn't ask questions like that about girls he's actually interested in. You've talked to him. Everybody's talked to him. His father's people are everywhere lately. You should be careful, Amara." She wanted to believe it was concern. With Tyrell, she had learned, it was never entirely one thing or the other. She thanked him anyway, because even a warning wrapped in guilt was still a warning, and lately she needed everyone she could get. Derek Ortiz had been in 3 of Amara's classes since sophomore year, and had made his interest in her clear in ways that ranged from irritating to unmistakably threatening. His father ran half the state's political machinery from behind a desk nobody elected him to, and Derek had grown up believing that was the same thing as owning the room he walked into. "You've been avoiding me," he said, blocking her path outside the lecture hall. "I've been busy, Derek. Too busy for someone who could actually take care of you. You're out here working yourself into the ground for people who don't even appreciate it. And for what? That's not your business. Everything about you is my business. I decide that, not you." She stepped around him. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, and for one suspended second the hallway around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether anyone would do anything about it at all. "Let go of me. You'll thank me later." Somebody's coat brushed past them both, and then Derek was stumbling backward, released so abruptly he nearly lost his footing. Julian Vance stood between them without raising his voice, without doing anything that could be called a threat by any legal definition. And yet, the temperature of the hallway changed completely. "She asked you to let go. Do you know who my father is?" "I know exactly who your father is. I also know campus security is 1 phone call away, and I know how this looks on the footage from that camera behind you. Your choice." Derek left, but not before promising, in a voice pitched low enough that only the 2 of them could hear it, that this was not over, and that people who crossed his family generally learned to regret it eventually. If you were holding your breath through that hallway, you're not alone. Comment below if you think Derek's father is behind more than we've seen so far. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. "You didn't have to do that," Amara said once they were alone, rubbing the red mark already forming on her wrist. "Yes, I did. Julian." It was the first time she had used his first name since the diner. "This can't happen again. Whatever this is, whatever we almost started, it's going to get both of us hurt in ways that have nothing to do with Derek." He looked at her the way he had looked at her intake form the night they met, like a puzzle he had already decided was worth the time it would take to solve. "But I'm not the kind of person who walks away from something because it's inconvenient. I never have been. Ask anyone who knows my family." She did not know yet what that meant, or how much weight sat behind the word family when he said it. She only knew that for the first time since the accident, someone had stood between her and a threat without asking her to pay for the privilege. It would not be the last time that week someone stood between her and a threat. It would, however, be the last time it happened without cost to someone she trusted. The call came in at 9:40 on a Tuesday night. Denise's number lighting up Amara's phone in the middle of a study session. "Amara, it's your father. He's been hit again. Right outside the pharmacy. You need to come now. They're taking him to Riverside, not St. Augustine. Hurry." She did not remember leaving the library. She did not remember most of the drive. Only the sick, cold certainty in her stomach that lightning did not strike twice, unless something was wrong with the sky itself. The address Denise had given her led to a stretch of warehouses on the edge of town. No hospital signage anywhere, no ambulance, no Marcus. A black car was waiting instead, engine running, back door already open like it had been holding a place for her. "Get in," said a man she did not recognize. "Your mother sent us." Every instinct she had told her to run before her legs had finished deciding to. She turned, and the man's hand closed around her arm hard enough to leave fingerprints. And for one endless second, Amara understood the way you understand a wave is about to close over your head, that she had walked directly into something with no way to walk back out of. Headlights swung around the corner of the warehouse before the car door could close behind her. Julian had been 3 minutes behind her the entire drive, close enough that when her location pin had stopped moving somewhere that was not a hospital, he had known exactly what that meant before he let himself think the word trafficking all the way through. He was out of his car before it had fully stopped, and the man holding Amara's arm let go the moment he saw who was walking toward them. The particular kind of retreat that only happens when someone recognizes a name attached to consequences they cannot afford. "This doesn't concern you," the man said. "It does now." Julian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I have people on the phone with the police right now reading them this location. You have about 90 seconds to decide how deep you want to be in this when they arrive." The car was gone before the 90 seconds ran out. Amara did not fully stop shaking until she was sitting in the front seat of Julian's car 3 blocks away, both hands wrapped around a coffee he had bought her from a gas station and pressed into her palms like it could fix something. "My father wasn't hit by a car. No. Denise called me. It was her number. Her voice. I know." "Then how?" She stopped, because the answer was already arranging itself in her chest, ugly and undeniable. Denise had not been tricked into that call. Denise had made it. When Amara confronted her that night, Denise did not deny it so much as refuse to acknowledge it had happened at all, insisting she had never made any such call, that Amara must have misunderstood, that maybe it was a scam targeting her specifically, and wasn't that just further proof she needed to be more careful? The lie sat between them for exactly as long as it took Amara to realize arguing further would not produce a different answer. It would only cost her more nights lying awake, wondering how far her own mother had been willing to let this go. Marcus heard about it 2 days later, when he was strong enough to sit up without help, and the color drained out of his face in a way that had nothing to do with his spine. "She used my name to do that to you? She said it was a misunderstanding." "There's no version of that where it's a misunderstanding, Amara." He reached for her hand with a grip that was slowly coming back to him, stronger every day since the surgery. "Whatever happens with her, whatever this family turns into, you are still my girl. That was true before any of this, and it doesn't stop being true now. You hear me?" She nodded, because if she had tried to answer out loud, she would have started crying in a hospital hallway. And she had promised herself a long time ago that she would not do that in front of him. Julian did not let the warehouse address disappear quietly either. He brought it to the one person in his family's orbit he trusted to ask questions without asking why he cared so much about the answers. A private investigator named Reyes, who had done quiet work for the Vance family for over a decade. That property's owned through 3 shell companies, Reyes told him within 48 hours. All of them tracing back eventually to a holding group tied to Ray Ortiz. "I'd be careful how loud you say that out loud until we have more than a warehouse address and a scared girl's phone call. Keep looking. That's going to take time and money and probably some risk you haven't priced in yet. Then price it in. I'm not walking away from this." That is the phone call that changes everything. Subscribe to True Worth Films to see exactly how far this family's betrayal really goes. 3 days later, Eleanor Vance requested Amara's presence at the main Vance residence, a house with a driveway longer than Amara's entire street, and got straight to the point before Amara had finished sitting down. $50,000, Eleanor said, sliding an envelope across a coffee table worth more than everything Amara owned combined. "All I ask is that you end things with my son. Quietly, before it goes any further than it already has." "No." Eleanor blinked, clearly unaccustomed to that particular word arriving so fast. "You understand what refusing this means for your future. I understand you think I can be bought the same way everyone in my life has always assumed I could be. I'm telling you no because Julian has done nothing but treat me like a person, and I'm not going to sell that to make you comfortable." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind her expression that had not been there when Amara walked in. "Where did you say you were born again?" "Riverside County." "Why?" "No reason." Eleanor's eyes lingered a moment too long on the thin, plain bracelet at Amara's wrist before she looked away entirely. "I was simply curious." She did not explain why the question had come out of her at all, or why, after Amara left, Eleanor sat alone in that room for nearly 20 minutes, staring at nothing, turning something over in her mind that she was not yet ready to say out loud, not even to herself. It started, as most explosions in that house eventually did, over money. Amara had gone looking for the folder of medical paperwork she needed for Marcus's second surgery consult, and found instead, tucked behind it in the same drawer, a receipt for $6,000 withdrawn from the account she had set up specifically to protect what was left of the surgery fund. The withdrawal was dated the same week Denise had claimed there was nothing left to give. Where did this go? That's not your account to be checked. It's my money, Denise. I earned every dollar in it, and I raised you every day it took you to be able to earn it. So don't you dare stand in my kitchen acting like you don't owe this family a single thing. I don't owe you a lie about where $6,000 disappeared to. Terrell appeared in the doorway before Denise could answer, his face already carrying the particular guilt of someone who had known something for longer than he had said it out loud. It went to me, Amara, for a car. She said the surgery fund had a cushion in it, that it wouldn't matter. A cushion for what happens if Papa needs a second surgery and there's nothing left to pay for it? Don't you dare use that word in this house. Denise snapped, and something in her voice had gone somewhere Amara had never heard it go before, past anger and into something closer to panic. He is not your papa. He was never your papa. Not really. Not the way you keep saying it like it means something. The kitchen went silent in a way that had weight to it. The kind of silence that comes right before a structure gives out. What are you talking about? You want to know why I never treated you the way I treat Terrell? Denise's hands were shaking now, whether from fury or from finally saying something she had held for 2 decades. Amara could not tell. Because you were never mine to raise in the first place. We found you, wandering the block behind the old laundromat, 4 years old, no shoes, nobody looking for you that anyone could ever find. Marcus wanted to help. I let him, because that's the kind of man he is. But I never once agreed to call you my daughter, and I am done pretending I ever meant it when I did. That's not true. Amara's voice had gone very quiet, the particular quiet of someone standing on ground that had just proven it was never solid to begin with. Tell me that's not true. Marcus's wheelchair rolled into the doorway behind Tyrell, and the look on his face was not denial. It was something worse. It was the look of a man who had spent 18 years hoping he would never have to be the one to say it out loud. It's true, he said quietly, about how we found you. It's not true that you were never mine. I have never once, in 18 years, thought of you as anything other than my daughter. Blood was never the part that made it real for me. You knew. Amara looked between the two of them, the whole shape of her childhood rearranging itself in real time. This whole time you knew, and neither of you ever said a word. Would it have changed any? Would you have loved me less as your father, or worked any less hard to save my life, if you'd known there wasn't blood behind it? I don't know, Mark. I don't know anything right now. Denise had not moved from her spot by the stove this entire time, arms crossed tight over her chest, like she was holding herself together by force. You want to know the truth? I spent 18 years watching my husband love a child that wasn't his blood more openly than he ever managed to love the son who was. Don't stand there and act like I'm the only villain in this kitchen. I have spent 2 decades being reminded, every single day, that the best parts of this man went somewhere other than to me and mine. So you punished me for it instead of him. I told myself it was fair. Maybe it never was. I don't know anymore either. It was not an apology. Amara understood that, even as she heard it. But it was, for the first time in 18 years, an honest sentence. And honest sentences from Denise had always been rarer than money in that house. She left before anyone could stop her, out into a night that had turned unexpectedly cold, walking 3 blocks before she let herself stop and put both hands over her face and finally let out the sound she had been holding in since the word pity had left Denise's mouth. If you found out the family you sacrificed everything for was never really yours by blood, would you still forgive them the way Amara is about to have to decide? Subscribe for the next chapter, because this is only the beginning of what she's going to learn about where she actually came from. She did not see the black sedan idling half a block behind her the entire walk home. The same make and model, that had been waiting for her outside the warehouse weeks earlier, and she did not see it pull away only once she had made it safely inside. Julian saw it, though, on the security footage Reyes had quietly arranged for the block around her house, and it was enough to make him do something he had been putting off for weeks. He called his father. "I need everything you have on Ray Ortiz," Julian said. "Business dealings, political donors, anything that connects him to shell companies operating out of the industrial district." Richard Vance was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "You understand what you're asking me to go to war with, son. Ortiz has friends in places that make lawsuits disappear before they're even filed. I understand exactly what I'm asking. There's a woman he's had followed twice now, and I am done pretending this is somebody else's problem to solve. This is about the nurse. Her name is Amara. And yes, it's about her." His father exhaled slowly. "Then you'd better be prepared for what it costs to go after a man like that in the open, because he will not go quietly, and he will not go alone. People like Ortiz do not fall without taking swings at everyone standing near them on the way down." 2 days later, the swing came. A story ran in a local political blog, unsigned, alleging that the Vance family's youngest heir was being manipulated by a gold-digging nursing student with a fabricated background and a history of desperate financial schemes. It named her. It included a photograph taken outside the diner where she and Julian had first sat across from each other and told the truth. Amara read it standing in the hospital break room, her hands cold around a coffee cup she had forgotten she was holding, and understood, for the first time, exactly how much power a man like Ray Ortiz could bring to bear on a person he considered an inconvenience. This was no longer about a job referral fee or a family who had never told her the truth about where she came from. This was a war being fought with resources she did not have, against a man who had already shown he was willing to put her in the back of an unmarked car once already. Julian found her still standing in the break room 20 minutes later, the article open on her phone, her shift forgotten. He did not tell her it did not matter what it said, because he had learned by now that she could smell a comforting lie from across a room. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "This is what my world does to people who get close to it. I should have warned you sooner how ugly it can get. Are you going to tell me to walk away? For my own good?" "No." He said it without hesitation, which surprised her more than she expected it to. "I'm going to tell you that my father is already building a case against Ortiz, and that you have every right to decide how involved you want to be in it. But I am not going to ask you to disappear so my family's name stays clean. I'm done being the kind of person who lets that happen to people who don't deserve it." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had locked a door to scare her once, and then spent every day since trying to make up for every door life had ever locked her out of. "I want to be involved," she said. "Whatever it takes to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." She had never felt smaller in her life, standing in a break room with her name printed in a stranger's article, and her whole childhood rewritten in a single kitchen argument. She had also never been more certain that she was not going to disappear quietly just because someone with money wanted her to. For 2 days, Amara did not answer anyone's call. She sat in her dorm room, turning the plain bracelet on her wrist over and over between her fingers, the one Denise had once told her was a hand-me-down from a cousin, and asked herself the same question she had been asking since the kitchen. If she was not Marcus's daughter, and had never really been Denise, then what exactly was left of her that belonged anywhere at all? She thought about withdrawing from her final semester. She thought about taking a job in a different city, somewhere none of these names could follow her, somewhere Ray Ortiz's reach did not extend, and nobody's last name determined what she was allowed to survive. She had done the math more than once on how far $600 in a duffel bag could take her. It was Eleanor Vance, of all people, who stopped her from going through with it. "And that bracelet," Eleanor said, when she finally tracked Amara down at the hospital cafeteria. No envelope in her hands this time. No offer to make her disappear. "Where did you get it?" I don't know. I've had it since before I can remember. Denise always said it came from somewhere on her side of the family. But I stopped trusting anything Denise says about where I came from. May I see it? Amara unclasped it, more out of exhaustion than curiosity, and watched Eleanor's face change the moment she turned it over in the light. I have a friend, Eleanor said slowly. A woman named Diane Calloway. We grew up together. When we were girls, we had matching bracelets made, engraved the same way, a single pair, nothing else like them in the world. Diane's daughter disappeared from a shopping center parking lot when she was 4 years old, 19 years ago. Diane never stopped looking. She still has the matching one in a drawer in her bedroom because she has never once been able to make herself put it away. The cafeteria seemed to tilt slightly around Amara. That's not possible. I don't know if it's possible or not, but I know jewelry like this does not exist twice by accident. And I know a coincidence this specific deserves to be checked before either of us decides it isn't real. She's about to find out who she really is. Subscribe now so you don't miss the moment everything changes for Amara. Eleanor arranged the test quietly. Through a private lab, no press, no public record. Results held until they were certain. Amara sat in a waiting room for the blood draw, feeling like she was standing at the edge of two entirely different lives, unable to see which one she would land in when the results came back. You don't have to do this, Julian told her, sitting beside her, his hand loosely covering hers on the arm. Whatever it says, it doesn't change who you've already proven yourself to be. I know that. I still need to know. I've spent my whole life being told who I belong to. I want, just once, to know something true about where I actually came from. While she waited, she made the second decision that would define this entire chapter of her life. One that had nothing to do with bracelets or blood tests. Reyes needs financial records, she told Julian that same afternoon. Bank routing, insurance claims, anything tying those shell companies to real people who can be arrested instead of just theorized about. That's not information either of us has access to. I have access to hospital intake systems. If Ortiz's operation has been moving people through medical channels the way Reyes suspects, faking insurance claims, falsifying intake forms to explain injury, there will be a pattern in the billing code. I know how to read that pattern. I've been reading medical charts since before I could legally work a real shift. Amara, if anyone traces that back to you accessing records outside your assigned patient, you could lose your license before you even earn it. Then I'll be careful. But I am done being the person this story happens to, instead of the person who does something about it. It was the first time since the accident that she had chosen a risk entirely on her own terms. Not because someone needed saving and she happened to be standing closest, but because she had decided, finally, that some fights were worth choosing even when nobody was forcing her hand. Julian looked at her the way a person looks at someone they have just watched become entirely, unmistakably themselves. Then let's find that pattern, he said. It took her 4 nights of quietly cross-referencing intake logs against the list of shell company names Reyes had gathered, staying late after her shifts under the excuse of finishing continuing education modules nobody bothered to check. On the 4th night, she found it. 3 separate patients over the past 14 months, admitted for injuries that did not match their stated causes, all 3 listing the same third-party insurance sponsor on their paperwork, a company called Meridian Occupational Holdings. Meridian Occupational Holdings was the second name on Reyes's list of shell companies tracing back to Ray Ortiz. Her hands were shaking again by the time she photographed the records on a hospital-issued tablet, meant only for internal use, aware of exactly how much trouble she would be in if anyone asked her why a nursing student was pulling files on patients who were not assigned to her. A supervisor's footsteps passed the nurse's station twice while she, and both times she closed the folder and busied herself with something innocent until the sound faded, her heart hammering hard enough that she was certain it was audible. "This is it," Reyes said 2 days later, spreading the printed pages across Julian's kitchen table like a hand of cards, finally worth playing. This connects the shell company directly to falsified medical documentation for at least 3 trafficking victims. Combined with the warehouse address and the financial trail I already had, this is enough for the district attorney's office to move. This is enough to end it. How long? Amara asked. Before something happened? Days, not weeks. But Amara, listen to me. Once we move on this, Ortiz is going to know exactly who handed us the last piece he needed to find. You need to be somewhere safe when it happens. She thought about Mark. Still recovering at home, still the safest place she knew how to imagine, despite everything that house had cost her to understand. She called him that night for the first time since the kid. I don't know how to feel about any of it yet, she told him. About what Denise said, about not being yours by. I don't know how to hold all of it at the same time. You don't have to know yet, Marcus said. I've had 18 years to be sure of one thing, and I'm not going to stop being sure of it now just because the ground under everything else is shaking. You are my daughter. That part was never up for negotiation, blood or no blood. Whatever you find out about where you came from, that doesn't take away where you've been. It was not an answer to it. It was, she realized, listening to him breathe steadily on the other end of the line, enough to get her through whatever was coming next. The results came back on a Thursday morning, 99.99%, printed in the flat, clinical language labs use for the biggest moments of a person's life. Amara Bell was Diane and Robert Calloway's daughter, stolen from a shopping center parking lot 19 years ago and never once given up on. Diane arrived at the lab before Amara had even finished reading the second page, and did not wait for an introduction, did not wait for permission. Crossed the small waiting room and pulled Amara into her arms like 19 years had not passed at all. My girl, she said, into Amara's hair, her voice breaking apart on every word. My girl, I never stopped looking, not for one single day. I don't know how to do this, Amara admitted, shaking against a stranger who was somehow also, undeniably, her. I don't know how to be someone's daughter. You don't have to know today. You just have to let me hold on to you while we figure it out. Behind them, a young woman about Amara's age stood a little apart from the reunion, arms crossed tight, watching with an expression that had nothing to do with Julie. This was Sophia, the daughter Diane and Robert had adopted in the years after losing their first child, raised as their own in every way that mattered. And now watching the family she had spent her whole life anchoring rearrange itself around someone else. And so that's it, Sophia said quietly, once Diane had finally, reluctantly, let go long enough for introduction. 19 years, and I just get moved over. Sophia, don't. Not to. She left the room before anyone could stop her, and Amara understood, watching her go, that finding a family did not automatically mean everyone in it would be glad to make room. There was no time to follow. Reyes called within the hour, his voice sharp with the particular urgency of a plan finally reaching its last stage. It's happening now. The DA has enough for warrants, 3 properties, financial records, the falsified hospital paperwork Amara found, Ortiz and his son both. The footage that reached the local news by evening showed Senator Ray Ortiz being led out of his own office in handcuffs, still shouting into a phone about lawyers who would make this disappear, lawyers who, for the first time in his career, were not going to be enough. Derek was picked up an hour later at a private airfield, a packed bag beside him. A one-way ticket to a country with no extradition agreement clutched uselessly in his hand. Powerful men have a way of believing consequences are for other people, Julian said, watching the footage beside Amara in his father's. Tonight, he found out he was wrong. The charges, when the district attorney read them aloud on the evening broadcast, ran long enough to fill a full segment. Human trafficking, falsification of medical records, conspiracy, obstruction. 3 other women, the anchor reported, had already been located and were receiving support services, Their case is built on the same financial trail a nursing student had helped uncover from inside a hospital record system. Nobody used Amara's name on it. She had asked Reyes for exactly that. And for once, being the person nobody noticed felt like a mercy instead of an insult. Eleanor found her in the hallway outside the study later that night, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I owe you an apology," Eleanor said. "I offered you money to disappear, and then I was the one who noticed a bracelet that changed your entire life. I don't know how to hold both of those truths about myself at once. You don't have to. You just have to keep being the second one going forward." Eleanor almost smiled at that. The closest thing to warmth Amara had seen from her yet. My son chose. I was simply too slow to see. The confrontation that mattered most to Amara personally happened 3 days later. At a small gathering Diane insisted on hosting to formally introduce her daughter to the small circle of people who had known about the search all along. Denise showed up uninvited, Tyrell trailing uncertainly behind her, and made it exactly 4 steps into the foyer before Robert Calloway security intercepted. "You don't get to walk into this house," Amara said, stepping forward before anyone else. "After everything, and pretend you're here for anything but what you can still get out of me. I raised you. Whatever else is true, I raised you. And that has to count for something. It counted for 18 years of me believing I only belonged somewhere if I was useful enough to earn. I'm done paying that particular. You can't just cut us out." "Watch," Robert said quietly. And it was not a threat so much as a fact, delivered by a man who had spent 19 years learning exactly how far he was willing to go to protect the daughter he had finally gotten back. Denise left without another word. Tyrell lingered half a second longer at the door, looking back at Amara with something that was not quite an apology and not quite nothing. "For what it's worth," he said, "I hope you get to keep this. The good version. You should get to have that at least." Then he was gone too. And Amara stood in a foyer that belonged to parents she had known for exactly 4 days, surrounded by people who had chosen her, some by blood and some simply by refusing to let her disappear, and let herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, believe that she had finally landed somewhere. Denise tried one more time, 3 weeks later, showing up outside the nursing school parking lot as Amara was leaving evening class. "You owe me a conversation, at least," Denise said, stepping into her. "After, you don't get to decide what I owe you." Amara did not raise her voice. She did not need. "There's a restraining order being filed this week. If you approach me again, or approach anyone in my family again, it becomes a criminal matter instead of a civil. That's just what happens next." Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again, and for the first time in Amara's entire life, walked away without getting the last. The judge granted the order without hesitation the following week, permanent, covering every member of the Bell household except Sophia. Found her on the back porch of the Calloway house the same afternoon, 2 mugs of tea in her hands, an offering she did not quite know how to phrase out loud. "I've been unfair to you," Sophia said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be taken from a parking lot, and you definitely didn't ask to walk into a family that already had a daughter in the spot you were supposed to. I didn't come here to take your. I know that. I think I always. I was just scared there wasn't room in this family for both of us to." Sophia handed her one of the. "There's room. I want there to be room anyway. I'd like the chance to be your sister if you'll let me." "I'd like that too," Amara said, and meant it more than she expected. Marcus came to the wedding 6 months later, wheeling himself down the aisle behind Amara with a strength in his shoulders that had not been there the day the car nearly took his life, refusing anyone's help until the very last few. When he reached up and took her hand and said, "Are you ready, my daughter?" And the word landed exactly the way it always had, uncomplicated by blood, undiminished by anything Denise had ever said in that. "Yes." Diane and Robert stood in the front row beside Eleanor and Richard, two families that had no reason to know each other a year earlier, now bound together by a bracelet, a bus stop, and a woman neither side had been willing to give up. Sophia stood beside her at the altar, not a rival, just a sister who had learned, the same as Amara, that love was not a fixed amount that ran out the moment someone else needed some too. Julian took her hands as the ceremony began, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The whole noisy year between them folding down into something quiet enough to finally just, "I once locked a door to protect you from something dangerous," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "I never imagined I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be the reason every other door stayed open." And somewhere behind them, past the rows of two families finally sitting in the same room, the evening light came through tall windows, the same warm gold as the hospital hallway, where she had once made herself a promise she had no idea yet how she would keep. She had kept it. She had kept it, and gained more than she ever thought possible in exchange. Thank you for watching Amara's story all the way to the... Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. And subscribe to True Worth Films, because there is always another story waiting about what it really means to find out your worth.